It was a Friday night, and I was home alone. My parents had left for a weekend getaway, so the house was quiet. I was looking forward to some peace and quiet. I had just finished my homework and was sprawled out on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I knew my parents had told me they'd be gone for a few days. I got up and went to check the door. I double-checked the locks. Everything was secure. Still, the footsteps kept coming slow, deliberate. And it wasn't the usual creaks the house made at night. No, these were footsteps. I froze for a second, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the house was just settling, right? I called my mom, trying to stay calm. "Mom, you guys are still at the hotel, right?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She confirmed they were, and I felt a bit of relief. But the relief was short-lived because the footsteps kept going, and now they seemed to be coming closer. One by one, they echoed down the hall. My mind raced. Could it be an intruder? No, I would have heard someone at the door, right? The house was too quiet for it to be anything else. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. I grabbed my flashlight and went upstairs, slowly making my way down the hallway, my steps barely making a sound on the old wooden floors. I checked the guest rooms, the bathroom, even the closets. Everything seemed normal. But as I turned to leave the master bedroom, something caught my eye. A shadow. It darted quickly across the far wall of the room. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, but when I flicked the light on, the shadow vanished. I checked under the bed, behind the curtains, even the closet, nothing. I was terrified. Could it have been my imagination? But then I realized I wasn't imagining the cold, unsettling feeling. The air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. I quickly called the police and told them I thought someone was inside the house. I heard their calm voices on the other end of the line as they assured me they'd send someone right away. I waited. It felt like hours, though it was only about 15 minutes. The officers arrived, searched the house, and found no sign of an intruder. They assured me it was probably a mistake, or maybe just the house settling like my mom had said. But they also mentioned a disturbing detail. Other houses in the area had reported strange sightings. People seeing shadows in windows or hearing footsteps when no one was there. The police left after taking a final look around, and I tried to relax. But as I sat on the couch, my mind kept drifting back to the shadow. I was staring at the window when I noticed something that made my heart stop. A shadow. This time, right outside the living room window, it loomed tall and thin. I ducked down quickly, grabbing my phone to call 911 again. But when I peeked out the window, there was no one there. The street was completely empty. I've never felt so exposed in my life. To this day, I don't know if there was an intruder or if something else was in the house that night. All I know is that whatever it was, it knew how to hide in the shadows. I've been babysitting for a while, and it's usually a pretty easy job. It's a chance to earn a bit of money while taking care of some kids. One night, I was asked to watch a couple's newborn baby. They had this high-tech baby monitor that let me see and hear everything going on in the baby's room. It even had a two-way audio feature, so I could speak to the baby if needed. The parents left for a dinner date, and the house felt quiet. I made myself comfortable in the living room with some snacks, glancing at the monitor every so often to check on the baby. The first few hours went by without incident. The baby was peacefully asleep in his crib, and I was scrolling through my phone, minding my own business. But then, around midnight, I heard something strange from the monitor. At first, it was just static, like the kind you get when the signal is weak. But then, I heard a voice. It was faint, but it was definitely there. Hello? It sounded like someone whispering from the other side of the room. I was immediately on edge. The voice sounded so real. I grabbed the monitor leaned in closer, and whispered back, "Hello?" There was silence for a moment, and then I heard it again. "Come here." My stomach dropped. What? Who was in the baby's room? The baby was still asleep, and I could clearly see through the monitor that there was no one else in the room. I was certain it was just interference or maybe some kind of glitch. But the voice was so clear, so insistent. I stood up and walked into the nursery, my pulse racing. Everything was still. The baby was sleeping soundly in his crib. I checked the windows, the closet, the corners of the room. Nothing. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was just overreacting. But as I turned to leave the room, I heard it again. This time, louder and more urgent. "Come here. I'm right behind you." I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. I turned around quickly, but the room was empty. I bolted back into the living room and grabbed my phone to call the parents. I couldn't explain what I was hearing, and I was too scared to stay in the house alone anymore. I called them, but there was no answer. I tried again, but nothing. I felt a creeping sensation that something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked back at the monitor, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure move behind the crib. I ran out of the house to a neighbor's door and knocked frantically. They let me in, and I stayed with them until the parents came home. When they finally returned, I was shaking, and I told them everything that had happened. They laughed it off, saying it was probably just a technical issue. They went upstairs to check the baby, and when they looked at the monitor, it was just static, with no voice or movement. But as they calmed me down, one of the parents casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "We've had issues with the monitor before, some interference. People say they've heard voices in the static." I never babysat for that family again. And to this day, I can't stop thinking about the voice. Was it just a glitch in the system? Or was it something else trying to get my attention? The scariest part is, I still don't know who or what was behind that voice. This happened when I was 17. My parents had gone out to a family gathering, and I stayed home since I had an exam the next day. I was sitting in the living room with the TV on, just scrolling through my phone. It was around 10 p.m. when I first heard it, a faint clicking sound coming from the backyard. We had a sliding glass door in the kitchen that led to our backyard. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe an animal, but the sound was too deliberate, like something was tapping against the glass. I hesitated before getting up and slowly walking toward the kitchen. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. And then, as I reached the sliding door, the security light outside turned on. I froze. The light had a motion sensor, which meant something was out there. I peered through the glass but saw nothing. The backyard was empty, except for the old wooden swing set swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm myself down. Maybe a raccoon set it off, I told myself. Then I saw it. On the dewy glass door, near the bottom where the condensation had gathered, were smudges, like someone had been pressing their fingers against it. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I reached for my phone and was about to call my dad when the tap 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 sound started again. But this time, it wasn't at the door. It was coming from the window in the next room. I ran to the front of the house, turned off all the lights, and hid behind the couch. My breathing was shallow. I could hear something moving outside, footsteps crunching on leaves. Then, silence. A full 2 minutes of absolute nothing. And then, the sound of the gate creaking open. I peeked through the blinds just in time to see a figure in dark clothing slip out through the backyard fence and disappear into the trees. I locked every door and window and called my parents, who came home immediately. We checked the security cameras the next morning, and that's when we saw him. For over 30 minutes, a man had been circling my house, watching me through the windows, hiding in the dark corners of the backyard. He had tried to get in. He had waited for me to come outside, and to this day, I don't know what would have happened if I had. I was 19 and living in a small apartment while going to college. It was an old place, built in the 70s, and had this weirdly large attic space above the kitchen. It had one of those pull-down ladders, but I never used it. One night, I was up late studying in my bedroom when I heard something move in the ceiling. At first, I ignored it. Old buildings make noises, pipes, wood shifting, whatever. But then, I heard it again, a faint but clear sound of shuffling, like footsteps. I turned off my music and listened closely. Silence. I shook it off and got back to work. But around an hour later, something creaked above me. It was so subtle, but definitely there, like someone was shifting their weight in the attic. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but by then, my gut was telling me something was wrong. I grabbed the broomstick and walked into the kitchen, staring up at the attic hatch. I was debating whether to pull it open when a loud thump came from directly above me. I jumped back so fast I nearly dropped my phone. My hands were shaking as I called my landlord and told him there was something in the attic. He told me to stay put and came over within 20 minutes with a flashlight and a baseball bat. We both stood under the attic door. The landlord pulled the string and slowly unfolded the ladder. A cold draft rolled down from the attic space. The landlord climbed up, flashing his light around. And then, he froze. "What the hell?" he muttered. I couldn't see what he was looking at, but his reaction made my stomach drop. A minute later, he climbed down, his face pale. "Call the police." Inside the attic, there was a makeshift living space. A thin, dirty sleeping bag, food wrappers, empty water bottles, and worst of all, a rusty pocket knife and a set of my apartment keys. Someone had been living in my attic. The police came, searched the attic and the rest of the building, but whoever had been up there was already gone. The terrifying part? There were small holes in the attic floor, drilled in spots that lined up directly over my bed, my desk, and my couch. That meant whoever was up there had been watching me for weeks, maybe longer. I moved out a month later. To this day, I always check my ceilings, because now I know. Sometimes, when you think you're alone in your home, you're not. It was just another normal night. I was 22 years old, living alone in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. I had just moved in a few months ago and was still getting used to the place, but I felt comfortable enough. The neighborhood was quiet, and there was nothing to indicate anything out of the ordinary. I had the whole place to myself for the night. My roommates were away for the weekend, and I planned to stay in and relax. The apartment was small, but cozy. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I first heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the TV, or maybe the wind outside brushing against the window. But then I heard it again. This time, it was clearer, a faint whisper coming from the hallway. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but it sounded like someone was talking, but no one was in the apartment. I stood up and walked into the hallway, trying to dismiss the thought that maybe someone had broken in, but there was no sign of anyone. The front door was still locked, and nothing appeared disturbed. I chalked it up to nerves and went back to the living room, but the whispering didn't stop. Every few minutes, I'd hear it again faint, like distant voices. Sometimes it sounded like a single word, sometimes just gibberish. It was almost as if it was coming from behind the walls. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it felt too real to ignore. After a few hours of this strange whispering, I decided to go to bed. As I lay in my bed, trying to fall asleep, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to echo from all around me. I couldn't pinpoint where they were coming from. It was as though the voices were coming from inside the walls, moving through the apartment like they were just out of reach. I pulled the covers over my head, thinking that maybe if I ignored it, it would stop. But the whispering continued, and this time it wasn't just words I didn't understand. It was a voice calling my name. I bolted upright in bed, my heart racing. There was no one in the room. No one was there. The apartment felt still, but the air was heavy, like something was just waiting for me to acknowledge it. The whispers continued, and this time, I could feel the presence. I was no longer alone. I couldn't take it any longer. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, my hand shaking as I explained what was happening. She didn't believe me at first, but she could hear the panic in my voice. She told me to leave the apartment immediately and come stay at her place for the night. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my things, locked up, and left. The next day, I went back to the apartment, but this time, I didn't go in right away. I stood outside for a moment, looking up at the windows, and something caught my eye. There, in one of the upstairs windows, was a shadow. It wasn't just any shadow. It was a dark, moving shape. It looked like a person. I nearly collapsed in fear, but before I could do anything, the shadow vanished and the window was empty. I spent the rest of the day looking into the apartment's history. I discovered that the building was old, and there had been strange incidents reported by previous tenants. No one had stayed in the unit for long. Some had claimed to hear voices at night. Others felt like they were being watched. I haven't stayed in that apartment since. I don't know what was in there, whether it was just my mind playing tricks on me or something far worse. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget the feeling of not being alone, even when I was the only one there.